To start things off, I'd like to offer a formal warning for anyone prone to motion sickness. This game doesn't really ever stop shaking. Now, contrary to what you might think between the given classes for a magic run, I started things off by choosing the Thief in order to get more healing, because for some reason, Thief gets more healing than either other class. We're treated to some incredibly cheesy writing and a cutscene that honestly aged pretty well in terms of purely visuals. This presentation is genuinely impressive, and the scale of things is at least pretty intriguing. Why is this game so critically panned again? Oh yeah, that doesn't inspire confidence. Me and some old guy turn up to the club like, hey, heard you got broken cloth physics and clipping textures in the second cutscene. What's up? Well, I started the tutorial because I haven't touched the game in a long time, and it necessitates you blocking and attacking. Damn it. So I restarted the game, rebuilt my character, and skipped the tutorial. And, get used to that camera, because there's no way that I'm aware of to disable the screen moving like a bobblehead in a paint shaker. The game lets you do things like talk to NPCs while still having enemy aggro, which is great. And as comical as it is, I mean that sincerely. I enjoyed not having to clear every area to talk to an essential NPC. Similarly, you can pause this game, which is incredible. FromSoft. Please. It's not fun. I'm an adult, and I've got other things to do sometimes. Now, to start making some actual progress, they had you taking a little side path, and in my case, sprinting past as many enemies as I possibly could, because my only spell currently available draws aggro, and slightly increases my mana regen. Not exactly the most helpful thing to have handy at the moment, because to clarify, we need magic that deals damage. Well, easy fix. I think it's the DLC that gives you access to some early skill points and spell points to spend on whatever you need. For my purposes, I chose to level up Faith by 2 and use Shelter. When it's active, I heal slowly, allegedly take less damage, and reflect damage that I take. The cast speed is painfully slow, and that is never going to change. Not even a little. Like, I could file my taxes, buy a house, start a successful career in singing, only to have it all fall apart as my voice changes horribly due to overuse, eventually falling into a deep depression as I become only a shadow of my former self, go to therapy and eventually rediscover my love of art, and not to put my self-worth in the approval of others, all to come back better, but overall less popular than ever for a handful of albums that would be regarded as heartfelt but more niche, and by the time that my last record were to fade into obscurity, I'd still have just enough time to get knocked out of the cast animation, canceling the whole thing. Am I exaggerating? Absolutely. Is it slower than molasses going uphill in January with crutches? 100%. Between this and this breakneck mana regen, this fight is a slog. Also, it's a boss, I guess. Just keep your distance to go through an existential crisis, and then let the boss slap you around a little, and it'll do itself in eventually. I, of course, poured all of my points into Faith, as it increases how much mana you can have. And I think maybe your regen rate? I'm not 100% sure, and the wiki for this game is absolutely terrible. It does provide enough information to lead me to a trinket that increases your regen rate, but I couldn't tell. Try not to be too impressed by these speeds. What I found, though, is that I wasn't getting any experience for killing enemies via reflected damage. I'm not sure why, but if I'm being honest, this is nearly where I abandoned this run entirely. Not being able to level in this hellscape would be a nightmare in its own right, because I don't have any other damage at the moment, and this game is buggy, to say the least. The soul standard is hold dodge to sprint, and that works. Sometimes. Very rarely, and it's hyper-specific about direction, elevation, obstacles. The main character, Harkin, will take literally any excuse available to stop running, which I can respect. But playing this was painful. Honestly, a casual run is a challenge in its own right. Well, the old man got blasted earlier, so I should probably go find him. Or what's left of him. Of course, the strategy would still be running for the time being, because engaging with combat is dreadful. And by running, I mean kinda walking a little faster, I guess. Of course, exploration is its own punishment, but that wouldn't be enough. No, that'd never be enough. And if you thought to yourself, you couldn't possibly be dumb enough to have made that mistake twice, well, I may have been dumb enough to do it twice, but at least I wasn't dumb enough to overestimate me like that. So if you really don't think about it, it was you who was the fool all along. Also, the enemies in this game are incredibly polite. A little impatient, sure, but I need this lever, and I appreciate them letting me through. This guy, though, wanted me to cut his hand off to prevent a spreading infection, which doesn't really sound magic-y in nature, so sorry, my guy. You're on your own. I then met a guy who wanted me to go find some runes for him. Of course I'll find them for you. Eventually. Maybe. I found one of 3, so partial credit. By sheer happenstance, I found the savior of this run, and the only reason you're seeing this video. So if you're upset that this is how I spend my time, you can send your angry messages to whoever left his gauntlet here. My kit now includes a projectile, an explosive, and a short-range blast. Of those, only the projectile is effective. I used it to slowly, and I mean incredibly slowly, farm out some levels before proceeding. Along my way, I found some genuinely funny writing.
Back off! This doesn't concern you.
Don't mind me then.
This whole setting takes itself so seriously. The characters, the little lore that I know. This moment makes me wonder if this would have been better received if they leaned into something more lighthearted. I know it was early on, and it was more or less replicating the Souls formula, but there still aren't a lot of games that really fit that niche. I don't know. Immediately after, though, was a gate that definitely wasn't going to close on me after going through. Oh no, it closed on me. But at least it led into a place that definitely wasn't a boss arena. Oh no, it's a boss arena. Well, at least this fight wouldn't be another slog of a fight with way too much health. Oh no, it's a slog of... So the commander is incredibly manageable. He likes to play a lot of waiting games, which isn't great. He summons in some tougher mobs that I can't really do anything about, but they're slow, so it's not a big deal. Constantly running away while waiting for regen. Despite having a shield, my projectiles hit the boss through it, so it's a whole lot of nothing. Or that would be the case if faster enemies didn't start spawning in too. I found that it was best to go with light armor to run away faster and time my attacks with these annoying little buggers. It meant I was more vulnerable, but it also meant that I could actually get away from the angry creature coming after me constantly. Most of the time. Luckily, after more tries than I would have liked, I was able to outrun my problems, and as much as I enjoy playing a summoner, adding mobs into an encounter is not what I would call inspired. It's like giving a boss a health regen gimmick. I found a guy that was pissed that I was out of prison, found out that the old prick is apparently fine and just abandoned me after healing up, so I've still got to search for him, and I'm being sent to kill more lords. The lords that give the game its name are basically just slightly bigger guys, so I really don't see what the big deal is. Y'all never heard of siege equipment before? I was directed to seek out a graveyard, but do you know what they also didn't give me? A map. Would have been kind of handy. Would have saved a really long time spent clearing out places that I didn't need to. It's okay though, I was able to look for some steps to help me on my journey. So I found the direction I was actually supposed to go, despite the general layout, and found the dude that was supposed to be helping me, but it's been hours. You could have at least left a note or something. Kind of a dick move, my guy. And of course, despite the fact that he never had any real role to play in my life or progress thus far, he wants something from me. Kinda reminds me of another father figure I've seen. As a reminder, blood relations don't have to mean anything. It's far more important that you find people around you that you love and who love you. You are under no obligation to have any relationship with anyone, and I'd advise against spending time with people who claim to be family. Find people that act like family. Also, here's another mob-heavy boss. You can, in theory, stop the worshipper from spawning things, but only if you've got damage, and at these mana regen speeds, that ain't happening. He can theoretically do a lot of damage at close range, and if you sit still, he can do a lot at any range. Close is the place to be. Especially because I found that magic just wasn't doing much to the big lug. He gives plenty of openings to cast spells, which is saying a lot, so I was instead able to focus on letting his own offense work against him. The damage it did was alright, it helped a lot with my sustainability, and he's a hell of a lot better at killing his own minions than I am. He also does a big AoE thing that's incredibly easy to avoid by just standing under cover. I don't remember if it one-shots you or anything, I just remember it having some kind of gimmick from when I tried this game several years ago. Aside from somehow getting incredibly lucky with some of the worst dodge rolls I've ever seen in a game, that's pretty much all there is to this fight. Just a really slow dance between two giant hunks of weightless mass swimming through a fluid about as viscous as stone. Also, 3 things. Where's my gauntlet? Why is the chainmail somehow skin tight? That's not how chainmail works. And why is there a gap in my arm? After that lovely little venture, I met up with my little band of terrible people. Looking back, I really don't think I actively liked any of the characters in this game. But we opened a portal to the Rhogar dimension, which suspiciously looks exactly the same as the last one, but a little more Darksiders. But regardless, I was able to meet up with my second savior of this run. See, my general output was uninspiring, and he was going to change that. You can get runes in this game. Those runes can be slotted into your equipment. When slotted into your gauntlet, it changes how it behaves. You can do each firing mode individually, and it also determines things like mana cost and damage. The rune type and quality are random, but you can quit out of the game to avoid saving and thus roll until you get the type that you want. I could have done this to get even better things, but I didn't for a while. I used what I got to do a lot of farming via my new explosive rune. It's basically a mini magic turret. It's weird, but it works a treat. She wants help finding out information on her lost family, and I really don't know where I'm going, nor have I been given any real reason to care about her struggles. I, of course, being the master of navigation, didn't immediately get lost in circular rooms that look pretty much identical to other rooms. And, it was really easy finding my way out. The fact that I didn't do it in a timely fashion has nothing to do with me not being able to locate the entrance in any way that you can prove in a court of law. After finding my way out, I immediately got lost again and sort of just stumbled through the demon dimension, and yes, I know they're called Rhogar, but they're demons. Incredibly uninspired demons. I'm here to shut down that giant portal-looking thing because they apparently can't just use the portal that we opened for reasons. I eventually managed to find my way to it, which of course means it'd be time for another lackluster boss. But even better, this one throws out a couple of ranged attacks that stun you long enough for the next hit to be lethal. Why make me sit here waiting to die? I want to get on with it to the next attempt. Look, even Harkin is upset. Dude's so mad he's breaking all the way down the stairs. As he does regularly. It's not a specific staircase. He acts like he's following and then stops constantly, which breaks sprinting. How did this get past QA? Oh, right, the boss. Yeah, it's super aggressive, at least compared to most bosses. This thing pretty regularly wouldn't even let me use my camera. The answer is simple. Be a coward. Run. Run like hell and let my turrets do the rest. The center of the arena will pretty quickly sap all of your mana, which makes retreating require at least a touch more thought. That thought is simply stay away from the giant glowy thing, but it's nice that it wasn't entirely mindless. I meet up again with the lady who is claiming victory over something, I guess. You didn't do anything. Followed by this guy who surely wouldn't ever be important to what's going on. Definitely never. I then found some deserters who were being attacked in the mortal realm and fled here as a means of escape, not knowing what was on the other side of the portal. I think I, as the player, am supposed to shun them for either leaving their post or ending up in the single worst place to end up, but I don't think they had much choice. They looked at one situation and said that would definitely kill them, so they went with one that might kill them. Smart pick if you ask me. I then gave the blacksmith a means of teleportation that he's been after. Right afterwards, I have to backtrack. And you might be thinking that you'd get some form of fast travel since I just brought it up and provided it for somebody else, but nope. Despite the relatively tiny map that this game offers, due to the incredibly slow traversal speed, this game takes what feels like an age and a half to get across, and there's no fast travel. I get that it's because they need to have you run into little story events like this guy who had the audacity to die in my direction while trying to give weak foreshadowing, but why does that have to be my problem to solve? I just want to get from point A to point B before I turn 80. Also, the enemy variety. It's not here. At all. You like the first boss? Be prepared to see him everywhere. There really aren't many meaningful enemies or general differences in how you handle them. Curiously enough though, this also translates to there not being much general scaling. It's weird how little progression there is outside of just finding new stuff and sort of leveling. Maybe weapon scaling changes that, but things like the armor and gauntlet just don't get upgrades outside of rarity of things being slotted. And that's all taken care of almost as soon as you have access to it. It's time to actually go through the arbitrary catacomb level. Perfect time to use some skeleton enemies. I don't know whether to give them bonus points for not having any, or deducting them for reusing the same enemies that I've been fighting for hours now. Hey, you know that spell that I use for basically everything? Yeah, sometimes it just refuses to target enemies if it's too close to them. It's a good thing it auto-locks onto enemies and goes in their direction even if you're not locked onto the enemy. You'd think that it being inside them would cause more damage, not less, but what do I know? I'm just the mage around these parts. I hate this place. Being a prison of sorts, which seems odd, maybe I just don't know enough about history. I went around opening a ton of doors. I eventually found some guys insisting that I needed to save them. If I open either door, it'll wake the monster in the other person's cell. Somehow them talking is fine, and if the key to either door works, why not unlock both of them and let them both open their doors at the same time, thus saving both? This makes no sense. But I saved the one that got me the magic trinket that never actually helped with anything. With this place being about as distinct as a white sock, I naturally got horribly lost here, but I did eventually find my way to the inevitable boss fight. He's fine, pretty aggressive, and very capable of bursting me down. Also, while your prayers being interrupted stops them, interrupting the gauntlet cast will cost the mana they use and also stop it from going off. Except in some cases where it'll just kind of fly off to God knows where, because did I mention that the ball has physics? Now, generally speaking, I don't mind trying at bosses. Dying's whatever. This game controls terribly, so those don't always feel like it's my fault, which is awful, but it is what it is. The problem that I have with dying here, though, still manages to be the run-up. I have to kill this guy, which can take 1 to 2 casts, which doesn't sound like much until you factor in the mana cost, then a spider and its underling to get back to the boss. And again, that doesn't sound that bad, except the decisions that went into making this game make no sense. Enemies don't respawn when you rest, but your mana doesn't get restored either. And sometimes your health doesn't. And sometimes your healing potions don't. I have no idea why it's so inconsistent in that regard, but again, remember, every time you die, you have to do it all again. It's all just so much waiting. Every time I went down, I just had this voice in my head saying, "And you know what that means!" And I did. I knew exactly what it meant. It meant doing it again! The boss is here, but it takes so unnecessarily long to get back for a rest that's so damn close. Just stay away from him. Dodge when he charges, and seriously, stay the hell away. His ranged attacks suck, but his melee attacks can actually do things. Until, of course, he goes down, like the sack of poo that he is. I'm then directed to go find the staff-wielding dude, and he's apparently accompanied by the leader of humanity. On my way, I found a totally not boss arena, and there isn't a boss here. I'm highly suspicious. The game has me fighting my way through a bunch of demons who have invaded the human settlement in a poor AI effort to kill the leader of the humans. Now, the game actually did introduce a new enemy type. They're just hyper-resistant to magic, which is great. Bright side, though, despite being fully capable of dealing a lot of damage, their AI is also abysmal. Is it still cheesing the game if I have to try not to break it? Regardless, you can pretty comfortably lob attacks around corners, and a lot of enemies won't even follow you if you do so. Despite their soldiers dying left and right, they seem upset with my presence, which is just nonsensical. Especially considering the higher-ups are directly expecting me. Apparently only the old dude was here, though, to greet me, and I'm being directed back down toward where I already was because this game loves backtracking. All to meet with a guy that was supposed to talk to me here. I was tasked with clearing out the Planetarium for reasons, and while I am upset that this is the route I had to go to get here, I was able to get through these dudes just like the tons of identical enemies before them and get an armor set that allegedly improves magic. It's also light versus the heavy set that I was wearing and has comparable defenses, so game balance. I met with King Douchebag, who informs me that his own men are weak as hell, then tells me that I don't understand the enemy despite being the only person doing a damn thing against said enemy. If he's got such a handle on things, then why am I here? Oh. Kill God. Sure. How? Oh, okay. Just do it. Got it. Great plan. Not sure why I didn't think of it first. It's super in-depth and definitely answers the question of how the hell I meant to do such a thing. This is why you're the person in charge. I got some more foreshadowing before fighting the incredibly interestingly named boss called Beast. At first, the big struggle here is the fact that spells sort of just didn't want to hit the big guy. The camera also freaks out when trying to unlock the camera, but please explain to me how this missed, because I don't get it. This wasn't even the worst example. I regularly had spells that were going straight through enemies that were entirely stationary. Non-aggroed enemies that were more or less invulnerable. Of course, this dude is living proof that it was a problem with the properly angry as well. To make matters worse, he's pretty good at closing distances. At least in terms of this game's general speed. Bright side though, when you die, you respawn right next to the boss fight. And I can't stress this enough, please, can this be the norm? If the boss is challenging, then getting back to them shouldn't be the struggle. I don't really have a good strategy for the whole thing though. My sustainability is fairly good by virtue of shelter, and one really handy bug that I found. If you get hit right as you finish the cast for your class's spells, it stops the animation but keeps the effect without costing any mana. It's incredibly hard to time, but when you can get it right, that's just free mana right there. It's one of a few bugs that actually helped me, so I'd take it when I could. I got lost, looked up where to go, found nothing helpful, and decided that fighting a boss was preferable to trying to navigate. He's quite possibly the fastest boss in the game. His hitboxes are awful though, so he's super easy to predict and dodge. And for his super deadly ranged attack, you can hide behind cover because this was a third-person shooter all along. Who knew? This was the real inspiration behind Remnant. Glad they went better places with this because that's it. That's his whole fight. I can't tell if I'm getting better or if the bosses are getting worse. I immediately got lost again, found that the internet really isn't helpful with the game, but that never stopped me from trying before or after, and I eventually found my way to my destination. To a magic wall that she wants me to break through, even though I already did. Ironic that the Chamber of Lies would be hard to find solid information for online. Right after, though, would be an incredibly confusing location with such helpful information as find some levers. Thanks forums from several years ago. Once again, I hadn't thought to just do the thing. Here I was trying wrong, I guess. Wouldn't have figured it out without such great guidance. Who designed this? To save us both some time, I was here to defeat the Annihilator, which isn't this giant thing because a massive boss fight with an anvil demon would have been too cool. She asked me to spare it because it has something to do with her family, and I can't be bothered to kill it, so sure, why not? Why does everyone else get to fast travel? And of course, you and I both know, I got lost on the way through the backtracking. But I was able to locate the actual boss, and I use the term lightly. For the majority of the boss fight, just strafe. Move back and shoot. That's it. His attacks are too slow to ever hit you if you just keep going around the world. And if that's too complicated to remember, then just put on the song, and it should sort it out for you. After his phase transition, he starts blasting with an attack that I'm fairly sure is undodgeable. It does a ton of damage and would probably be lethal, so when he starts firing it up, just start casting Shelter. Punish him for his hubris while also healing to full, and that's it. The Annihilator has only succeeded in annihilating my expectations because, seriously, The big demon was at least a lot more visually interesting. I then went to meet with a god who has some of the flimsiest philosophy I have ever heard. Now, you can only proceed through here by hitting the spectral whatnots of bosses I've beaten, which can be done with my explosive rune. So with that going on, I want to address what this divine being has to say. It pretty much entirely boils down to the demon attacks being our fault. By trying to banish evil from the world, we threw off the balance, and by trying to fight the demons, we make them stronger. It's not the gods' fault that they keep sending demons to kill us. They'd stop, I guess, if we just stopped fighting back at all. Aren't we the real evil beings for trying to protect ourselves? And the answer is twofold. No. And what the hell is wrong with you? A literal toddler could have written a more compelling argument with a half-broken yellow crayon on yellow construction paper 4 hours late to nap time. Also, because of how this game auto-locks casting, it was really hard to hit the last hologram, so I could receive a gift from a god that totally wasn't bargaining for their life, and I just kind of left. Before doing so, I met up with a spectral old man.
But I'm not the man you think I am.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were a prick. No, you're exactly who I thought you were. Ah, I knew it! I knew this was a boss arena. And the bosses here are absolutely awful. I'd like to once again refresh my subscription to the double boss fights are terrible camp, because I've yet to find even one that I genuinely enjoyed. These sort of trade-off between which one is active, sometimes both being in play, always being annoying. See, my magic will sometimes target the one on the ceiling, even though they're immune to damage while they're clinging to said ceiling. Otherwise, they suffer the same problems of every other double boss. You like being killed from off screen? This is the place to do it. I died here a good few times, each as frustrating as the last. Up until this life, where the bosses just stopped functioning. It made it really easy to kill one, because they weren't working. When I did, though, I should have known better, but the remaining boss directly rips off, was inspired by a certain duo, and he gains the attacks of the other. Well, I suppose it's not a complete rip. The other two gain augments to their moves, which makes them at least more thematically interesting. These ones, the only thing that sticks is the damage resistance. After, it's just one bad boss with both movesets, which managed to kill me. I may have been throwing orbs the whole run, but here's where the real throwing began. I eventually did manage to kill them, pretty close to each other too, time-wise, which was nice. The less time I have to spend dealing with huge AoEs and high damage projectiles, the better. I then had to fight my way through the castle, as I've been branded a traitor for reasons beyond me, and before you get excited by the prospect of new enemies and the humans that I'm being attacked by and killing, they're just reskins. Brutally strong reskins. Why can't they handle the lords again? Hey, I got this thing from a god, and I don't want it. Mind disposing of it for me? Thanks. The less I have to engage with this plot, the better. After slaughtering all in my way, I got a one-line cutscene, then a sucker shot while I was still stuck not being able to move due to the cutscene, and I always hated this guy. Wanted me to kill guys for deserting, which just seems unethical on every level. I managed to beat him. He also reveals himself to be sexist. Unsurprising. And then I proved my moral superiority by not killing him after cutting my way through his men. Now hang on, there are more of your friends and family on the way to my destination. After eventually getting through the healthiest sponges on this side of the portal, I found Judge. His voice isn't even half as pretty as Chris's, so I don't know who he was trying to fool. This fight can be broken into 3 parts. The first being up here, and it's pretty negligible. We then come down here, and the fight will always pick up here, so I don't know what the point of the last place was. This section has you avoiding mostly melee attacks at close range, of which he has 2 combos and a slam. At mid to long range, he has a ranged attack, which does a lot of damage, and a charge slam, which, well, he's the final boss. I'll let you fill in the blanks as to what it'll do to your health. This phase really isn't bad, though. His hitboxes and timing can be weird to get used to, but get used to them I did. Eventually. It does help that I finally slotted some runes into my armor for defense, but still, it's the last phase that I take issue with. He stops the fight to summon in mobs, where he fires a fire laser that will 2-shot me, even with my added defense. It moves incredibly fast, and has no real telegraph that I can see because he's really high up. You can sort of avoid this by being directly under the spot that he is, but I mean, sort of. It'll sometimes hit you anyway, and you have to be right up against the door because close enough isn't in this guy's vocabulary. Being under the balcony he's standing on somehow just isn't enough, and surviving here is only part of your worries. The rest is killing as many mobs as you can. They're not that dangerous, but when he comes back down, he saps their health to restore his own, and it didn't seem like I could physically do enough damage to outpace his healing. I was using a fire projectile rune as my main means of damage because it's genuinely the best I could find to use against him or they. To make matters even better, he gets new attacks that can one-shot while he's on the ground. And undodgeable, No, seriously, they track indefinitely, as far as I can tell, attacks that will lower your max health for the remainder of the fight. So you're on a clock until you literally can't survive a single hit while he heals himself. To bring some game philosophy into the conversation, I think that the Asylum Demon is one of the greatest bosses in the Dark Souls series. Everyone loves to point out Artorias, and I'm not denying that he's a fun and challenging fight, but the Asylum Demon does everything right. The first boss of a boss-heavy game like this should set the tone for things to come. And, unfortunately, the first Warden did a pretty good job in that regard. But it should teach you something. It should be the first major stepping stone in your progress through the rest. The Asylum Demon has some fairly good hitboxes, and a simple but effective moveset that teaches you how to play while also being imposing to new players. It's the first taste of a hard-fought victory to those new to the genre. It's not even remotely hard for veterans, but the fight isn't for veterans. The Asylum Demon is pretty much everything you could ask for in a first boss. Conversely, the final boss should test everything you've learned. It should wrap up the experience. It's the culmination of the story and the tone, after all. Gwyn is maybe a poor example, but Judge weirdly is a great fit in that regard. This fight is awful. It's unfair. It's janky. It shows a pure disdain for casters, and it just feels underwhelming while also being a dreadful experience. And if he's meant to represent all that the game is, well, he's got that going for him at least. I ended up leaving to collect some stuff. I spent hours in-game searching and Googling to find this guy who has a shield that could maybe help. I wasn't sure if holding it or this weapon would actually do anything, but they both claim to do some things for magic. I think it's supposed to be if you're actively using them, which I didn't. I don't know, it still seems like it was regenerating my mana faster. For a game this old, the documentation is terrible. I stepped over to a DLC called Ancient Labyrinth to pick something up. I'll let you guess how I felt about this place based on the name alone. And this one has the skeleton enemies. Why weren't they in earlier in the dead portion? And before you get too excited, they're just reskins. After getting incredibly lost, I made my way to the boss fight of the place by happenstance. Problem though, when you deplete the orange bar, he pulls out a one-shot AoE, and the only way to avoid it is to get behind barriers that he pulls up. Except he will regularly launch said attack at the exact same time that he pulls up said barrier. So the only way to dodge it at that point is to read his mind, because I've seen smartphones without batteries run faster than this man! Also, this game went from 0 crashes to multiple, and every time it was in the middle of this fight. Dude not only one-shots you in a way that you can't necessarily counter, but he can just close the game. I found that standing in front of his lightning and casting shelter was the preferable method of phase transitioning. It was less likely to push him through his animations faster. The majority of the boss fight, instead of being a third-person shooter, was a first-person shooter. Because the camera sucks. After getting lucky enough to get through, I pushed him into his last phase, where he went down really quickly, but this boss is absolute trash. But that's not the end of it. No. I spent hours traversing the labyrinth in search of a key to try my hand at a bug that didn't end up working, so after several hours of pain and suffering, it was all for nothing. I was at a loss as to what to do at this point. So I finally invested a couple of points into health, tried again, got a lot more aggressive, and I swear something is making me regenerate mana faster. I was able to cast both of my primary spells and even throw a little flamethrower into the mix. Otherwise I changed nothing and it worked really well. I was elated to see him go down, but pissed to see how it happened, which was pretty much the same thing I did before. But at least it's done with, and I can definitely say that yes, you can beat Lords of the Fallen with only magic, no matter how much this game hates dedicated mages. And I restored the balance, or whatever. For all of this game's problems though, for all of the struggle and woes, I do have to admit that in spite of everything, this game sucks and I hate it. What'd you expect me to say? I've had the urge to play it for years, and that itch was scratched. I think I'm good. I'm really hoping that the sequel's better. And I did have some fun at least, even if only marveling at just how far things have come. Sometimes it's nice to have junk food to appreciate a fine meal, you know? Genuinely, I really hope to see some good things with the sequel. It feels weird that they're taking another swing at it, but I wish them luck. Somewhere under this game's issues, there's probably something really cool, and I hope the sequel can stand as a lesson in not letting where you're from define where you're going. With regards to this title, though, I hope you enjoyed your time here. You probably know how to use social media, and I hope that means I'll get to hear your thoughts now and on any future outings. Special thanks to my lovely channel members. I hope this prompt wasn't too rough on you, and until the next, remember to stay safe, spread some kindness in the world, and I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.